Good evening. You're watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with David Frank. We're going to talk national news of the day. For several weeks in a row, the biggest story, of course, is the debt ceiling. The rumors are, even though President Biden has said he would not negotiate, is that he is negotiating. I think he's given up saying he's not negotiating because I think for a while they were trying to say that the talks that they're holding are not negotiations, but rather just discussions, whatever that means. And there's hints that he's actually willing to make some concessions in order for the Republicans to agree to pay the bills. So as we've discussed, the debt ceiling is something that we've got to deal with because we've got this crazy rule that in order to pay the bills, Congress has to approve more bonds or whatever to be able to the issuance of bonds to be able to pay them, and they're once again holding the country hostage with their agenda. And they're not even really unified on their agenda. They got all kinds of stuff that they want to demand. We don't know that McCarthy has. In fact, we know that he really doesn't have control over the Freedom Caucus, who probably really don't care if the economy goes downhill because they are in the safest of safe districts thanks to really bad gerrymandering. So that's the latest news. Meanwhile, Biden is going on a trip to Asia. Republicans are in a panic. Why is he doing this? He should be here negotiating with us. But the Democrats assure him that there is authorization to reach agreements on what concessions have to be made to the Republicans in order for the Republicans to agree to pay the bills. Dave?
Yeah, so kind of a snapshot of where we are now. I think you summed it up well. The idea is that there's this compromise position that is probably the only, not to bury the lead here or anything, but the compromise position may be the only way out ultimately, and I think that's why the negotiations are continuing in earnest.
And in fact, some Democrats are in panic as to what is Biden willing to give up here. They're really starting to worry about that.
Right. And so then the question is, I think you can break it down into two key elements here. One is the full faith and credit of the United States and the technical lifting of the deficit, the borrowing cap, versus the budget for next year, because ultimately we do have an extraordinarily large budget in response to COVID and the sort of stimuli that were put in place, and the infrastructure bill and the deficit reduction bill that wasn't a deficit reduction bill. These are huge spending programs, and so there's sort of a natural reversion to the mean that has to happen. So there's a question of maintaining budget priorities over the long haul versus the reality that the United States borrows just so much of everything that we spend. And so where the rubber hits the road, I think, is that in the shortest of terms, the president is maintaining the messaging that there's no compromise in the face of the full faith and credit. The money's going to be spent. The money that was allocated, by Congress will be spent. And so he's, I think, I don't know, hoping is the right word, but he's planning on there being some workaround that gets reached.
But so one of the things he's talking about, though, is that is he's saying he doesn't want to increase work requirements, which has everybody talking about. Are we talking about work requirements for entitlement programs, as they're called? For all of that. I mean, it suggests that and what does that have to do with the budget anyway? I mean, it's just it doesn't relate to the budget, and it certainly doesn't relate to the debt ceiling, and yet we're getting way off topic here.
Yeah. So what we'll have to talk about the negotiation, and then we'll have to talk about the reality. So in the negotiation, Biden is he's fairly confident. It seems that the director of the Office of Management and Budget, Shalonda Young, and also Chief of Staff and advisor now, Steve Ricchetti, who also was involved in the other negotiations like the infrastructure bill. And he's a former lobbyist for Fortune 500 companies, including Big Pharma. So these are some heavy hitters that have bipartisan credibility. So Biden is a moderate who's known for kind of doing the deal, and he's got two no nonsense negotiators in there. They are negotiating with people who are saying there's almost a religiosity to the Republican demands of shrinking the budget and shrinking the size of government and making cuts. The proposal that they put in place was a 22% cut across the board to all discretionary spending, which Democrats are saying is a total non-starter. So you've got this aspirational Republican position that is political, and you've got Biden coming in as a technocrat. His team is technocrats. They're like, what do we need to do to maintain U.S. leadership in the world economically, where that there's $20 trillion in U.S. debt out there. The United States is going to continue to pay interest. So that's the political side, making sure that the money gets spent, but that in reality it's really the warm-up act to the next budget, where in the next budget there's going to need to be some changes. So to address your specific question, what does entitlement reform have to do with this issue? I think it's part of the overall drama. It's a future act that's getting foreshadowed for political benefit. And maybe that political benefit will pay off, because what my thought is that ultimately the president needs to show some good faith here because of his own party. Because Manchin, for example, he's in there saying, hey, if we really had more energy reforms in this mix, you'd get my vote. He still wants pipeline approval and zoning reform. He's in there for his pet projects.
And he's threatening to try to repeal the some of what was passed last year. He's saying they're giving out way too much more permits or whatever for the alternative or sustainable energy projects than they were supposed to. The more tax breaks for electric cars than they had agreed to or whatever. And so he's threatening to vote against it, but it's fine. It's not going to pass because you need 60 people to pass anything in the Senate anymore. So it's not like it's going to happen. But there's also concern from the Progressive Caucus, and Payapal, who heads up the Progressive Caucus, is raising it and saying, you better talk to us before you start making any of these concessions, because we don't want, we're not going to agree to certain things, and especially you've got to really take up the issue of this should not even be happening, and you got to make that clear in the messaging. And it's there shouldn't be anything to negotiate for about paying bills for money that's already spent.
So I think that's a really good point. Is that you use the word should. This should not be an issue, and there is a relatively solid ground on the argument of the 14th Amendment that when the United States government commits to spending, that the full faith and credit is non-negotiable. Basically, I forget the exact wording, but in other words, if the government says they're going to pay for something, they pay for it. And in part, that was put in place after the Civil War because the thought was that, well, if there is ever a shift away from if sort of the Confederate States or that set of folks wanted to undo the war debt, for example, or some other result of Civil War, that they couldn't rescind the commitments to pay back those debts. And so that's a principle that it's probably, legal scholars could disagree, but it's very likely that even this Supreme Court would understand the importance of that, and that's a wild card. But I do think that not to foreshadow my prediction, but the 14th Amendment is a pretty solid argument. But what Biden said himself was that that would take time in the courts, and in the meantime, we still could have an economic catastrophe.
Only if there is a stay on it, if there's some sort of injunction imposed on it. He could quickly sell off, issue a bunch of bonds. Once they're bought, they're bought. He could buy time that way. He's just got to be bold on this to be able to do that. And I'm really, I've said this a couple of shows ago, really irritated at the media coverage of this. Will Biden resort to the 14th Amendment? There's no resort to the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment mandates that you pay the bills. In fact, in my opinion, and Lawrence Tribe hinted at this recently, that the 14th Amendment probably should be rendering the debt ceiling itself unconstitutional. Because that's how SCOTUS should be ruling, but they're not going to rule that way. I don't know. For all I know, it's already been up there, and because we've had it for quite a while. But again, it's not a question of resorting. It's a question of the Constitution is going to be violated one way or another. And I discussed this again a couple of weeks ago. So you might as well violate separation of powers rather than the 14th Amendment. I mean, it's just and go ahead and issue them. You can make an argument that it's in your executive power anyway to do it because you've got a 14th Amendment obligation. So yeah, it would take time in the courts, but maybe you can sell enough at least to buy some of that time before there's a stay imposed by the courts.
Yeah, and you mentioned selling bonds and trying to figure out a path. I think there's been a sort of a steady drumbeat, a uniformity of response from Treasury, from macroeconomic experts, that the cost of this truly ending up in some kind of train wreck, the cost would be order of magnitudes above what we're willing to do. So the president, I think maybe that's why he's operating with such confidence despite the lack of progress. But even like Paul Krugman in the New York Times had said, like, he was, upset. I don't know if upset's the right word, but he was in disagreement with the president not taking this more seriously and addressing it way back, in December when they knew that they had a small window of opportunity before the results of the election were implemented in January. But the idea is that I think Biden and his people are saying, look, they're not going to, meaning the Republicans, are not going to undermine the economy. So maybe they know they have plan A, plan B, plan C. They got some back pocket plans. But one of the ones which I thought actually makes a lot of sense is just to repay debts with more debts, sort of in line with what you said, which is if you are only paying the interest to people and replacing that bond with a new bond, then in fact you're not increasing the overall deficit. This is a highly technical thing. We don't have to get into the mechanics of it, but there are folks out there that say that there is a way to use new debt to replace the old debt to buy even more time until the hardcore budget negotiations can happen which has to happen in like September for the October fiscal year.
Well, I think one of the things also is that Democrats ought to be pushing McCarthy to dump the Hastert rule. Now, I don't know if it's Hastert or Hastert. I forget. But it's basically a rule that the speaker will not schedule a floor vote on any bill that does not have majority support within their own party. That means if you've go over, I forget what it is, 215 or 216 votes, that represents half of Congress. That if you don't have Republicans enough Republicans that the Republicans alone can pass the bill, you're not going to put it to a vote because you're not going to have a coalition of Republicans, Democrats passing a bill, and the Hastert rule is a god awful thing that somebody it's one of those things that just is absolute destruction of politics. People should absolutely not be doing this, but. There probably needs to be an understanding from Biden. If I make any concessions, you better be ready to set that aside and be ready to vote. Because if the whole Freedom Caucus decides not to support it, they're going to need the Democrats to make the majority, and they're going to say, don't play games with this. If we make this deal, then you don't worry about what Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz or Jim Jordan say. You go ahead and you move forward with the vote. And that might effectively put these things to an end in the future, because that's going to lead to civil war within the Republican Party, and maybe in the future Republican leadership will learn not to let this happen.
I think McCarthy, the whole process, the embarrassment, so to speak, and maybe he wasn't all that embarrassed, but the prolonged process of him becoming speaker, that there was the horse trading, the back and forth about the promises. I think that this collision course with that right-wing faction was baked into the cake. And then the question is, how can he thread the needle? My understanding is that moderate and establishment Republicans are comfortable working with both of Biden's negotiators because they have credibility. Like I said, Shalonda Young, before her OMB experience, she was on the House Appropriations Committee for more than a decade. So she's been there through thick and thin already. And like I said, and Ricchetti, he's a seasoned lobbyist with all like General Motors, the American Hospital Association, AT&T, Eli Lilly, Nextel, Pfizer, Fannie Mae. So he comes from an establishment position too. It's likely that there is a moderate compromise that's going to be incorporate some future budget changes, but that in the short term will result in them opening up, releasing enough money to get us through to that process.
Well, we'll be obviously discussing this within the next couple of weeks, because the deadline is coming up, according to Yellen.
These are not new expenses. It's paying bills that have already been incurred.
Why wouldn't we sit down now, set a budget, set a path to get us to a balanced budget, and let's start paying this debt off and make sure the future generation has as many opportunities as we do?
It is something that should be done without conditions. We should not be negotiating around it.
The extraordinary measures are things like not investing government employee contributions into the retirement funds, things where you can catch up later and make everyone whole.
All right, next topic, Durham's dud. Durham has been, this is a 4-year-old DOJ with special counsel investigation that was supposed to reveal that Obama was spying on the Trump campaign in 2016, got into all, he was given a lot of power in this. He had basically filed charges against 3 people, got a guilty plea for an FBI attorney who did alter an email in order to obtain a FISA warrant. Definitely should have been prosecuted. No prison sentence there, but I wish that would happen more often, because actually things like that happen to get warrants all the time. But that's a whole other subject. But then 2 others the criminal charges that were filed resulted in acquittals. And I think Durham got gun shy, so he issued what the media is calling a scathing report on the overreach of the FBI. But people, I've been on right-wing forums for 4 years. I think they're really disappointed, maybe about as disappointed as the left was with the Mueller report. They were expecting prosecutions, that this was going to crack something wide open. Instead, basically, Durham wags his finger and says, the FBI, you need to stick to your mission and not be political, and not be acting on leads on tips from people with a political agenda. I mean, they do this all the time, but so do cops. I mean, if it's a lead, it's a lead, right? If it's solid, but it goes into this whole thing about the Russian collusion hoax. Mueller, by the way, concluded that there probably was Russian collusion, just wasn't enough evidence to support a theory of criminal conspiracy. But we know that Trump met with the Russians. We know that he had his people speaking with them. He gave them polling data. Whether or not it was used for anything in particular, who knows? But we know that they met, and that alone is grounds for an investigation. I mean, certainly. So. But Durham questions this and says that those investigations never should have been started because the information came from people with a political agenda. He did come up, he only made one practical solution to the problem, and I'm not dead set against it, but somebody who's specially appointed to make the decisions when it's a politically charged event or situation. Now, how you would define that and what is politically charged, that's difficult to define, but he certainly didn't want to propose rolling back some of the Patriot Act stuff about lower thresholds for getting warrants, broad definitions of terror, extended, anything that would revisit that, and take, or to have hearings that might really look at how the Patriot Act came about and how dozens of pages of these 300-page document came out of nowhere from John Ashcroft, introduced through Trent Lott, Senator Trent Lott at the time. A lot to talk about here. I mean, I'm all for reform of the FBI, but this just was, it was like I had some tough words because he realized there was nothing there in terms of criminal. And he said that just because something's unethical doesn't mean it's criminal.
Yeah. So like you said, there is a lot there. And I've got two broad points here. One is that there's no smoking gun that Trump did anything particularly illegal. There's also no smoking gun that sort of the deep state was favoring Hillary Clinton excessively. But that said, there, looking at this report and looking back at the prominence of the report, how much it's been hyped up. It's kind of a tale of two cities. The mainstream media folks, people that are just kind of sick of talking about it, they're really just saying like there's not much here, other than that maybe the I say deep state, but in this case the FBI and the CIA, they should not have been involved in politics of this nature. But so that's kind of the consensus critique. One group saying this report is nothing, like you said, the dud. Virtually nothing, and that's pretty much mainstream. But then there's the critique that the report actually does highlight that some untoward things did happen. So what do I mean by that? Big picture, when Trump's got Paul Manafort and I'm not going to go through the whole list of names, but he's got a whole list of folks who have affiliations with Russia that were working with him in the lead up to the election, and other evidence that was paid for by folks who are involved in political electioneering. When you this combination of more than coincidental engagement with Russian folks and then sort of contrived potential sources of information. When you see those things happening in an election cycle, I would say it kind of makes sense for the FBI and the CIA to say, let's pay attention here. This could be something not great, right? It could be something threatening, could be something immoral, illegal, like I said, threatening. But once they knew that it was mostly, and I hate to say it this way, but amateur hour, Trump's team was not engaged in high level strategic intelligence coordination. Like that stuff wasn't happening. It was
no. I mean, politically speaking, though, if a Democrat had done it, there would be hell to pay.
Sure.
But but the fact that Trump was talking with Russians, just even talking with Russians. I mean, personally, I don't even really care if the Russians are dumping stuff into our social media. If voters are going to be dumb enough to be swayed by that, they're going to be dumb enough to be swayed by something else. I'm sorry, it's just the way I feel. So whether or not it's a source coming from outside the country or inside the country, but the issue for that was hypocrisy. Here is a guy running for the party that is basically xenophobic and doesn't want to, and is basically, it was up until that point anti-Russian. Here he is meeting with the Russians about the campaign. Like I said, they gave him some polling data, but whether or not that was even used or whether or not it was even helpful to the Russian campaign, we will never know as to whether or not it's that. I think the campaign was just like just throwing all kinds of stuff into the noise machine, and that's about it. But you're right, and we do need to basically look at the FBI. And I don't think people were even pro-Clinton. I think they're just anti-Trump. Some of them. I think there was that couple that were talking, the romance. I think they were, definitely because Trump, is kind of a fire starter and the like, and so we do need to deal with that. But the FBI has been doing this for years. I mean, under Hoover, the FBI was way involved. That's how we got COINTELPRO and how we had the church committee hearings in the 1970s. But a lot of the reforms that were passed that limited the power to do this kind of stuff and was rolled back with the Patriot Act. So I say let's have a hearing about it, but I don't think the Republicans will do that.
So firstly, I would have to say that the Strosick and the outliers of the couple who were intentionally anti-Trump and pro-Clinton. That to me, that's sort of outside the scope here for the time being. Two things. One is that in this report, in the Durham report, it says that we had president, vice president, head of the CIA, head of the FBI determining that they needed to proceed in support of one candidate over the other. That's pretty scandalous. And that both of those people, you can read it online, it talks about Brennan and it talks about Clapper and how they went on to go to CNN and MSNBC and amplify their intentions across mainstream media platforms. And there was a full court press. You could argue that that what they were doing was on behalf of national security because of how anti-Trump, how much of a threat they thought he might be. Right. So that's a thing that I think, like you said, maybe there ought to be hearings. Maybe that's the kind of thing that we don't want our intelligence community to be engaged in. But I want to go to the flip side of that, which is what they were saying. What they were saying is that, look, Russia is actively engaged in getting involved in our election, which the evidence says they were. And so their intelligence community was, involved in social media manipulation. The American public was susceptible to that manipulation, and all things being equal, they were targeting those states that did, in fact, probably lead to Hillary losing.
Because in a close election, it doesn't. You don't need much. Just you sway a few thousand voters, and
So even though it was ridiculous and to a certain extent facile, symbolic and not statecraft, but just troll. It's a troll farm. There was a troll farm hired by. But by that I mean like online just ridiculousness that might have marginally swayed people in. We're talking about Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, that region. That may have been enough. So so it's not a nothing burger. It's not a complete dud.
No, it's not. It does shine light, but it's nothing new. We've read about
Right.
these things.
Right. Oh, thank you. You reminded me when you said that with COINTELPRO and the Church Commission and all the things that the FBI was involved in, like you said, Hoover. That's not our moral barometer of what we expect. I think.
Well,
not what we expect, but what we should expect, maybe.
This was the key. When Hoover refused to. Well, he may have understood, but refused to acknowledge is that the FBI is not a policy organization. It's a law enforcement organization.
Right.
So he saw it as his job to destroy movements that he thought were destructive to the country. And so not only he wasn't even trying to stop crime at the time. COINTELPRO revealed that there were agent provocateurs burning flags and doing things to get things going, and crazy things like one agent. There's a really good documentary called 1971. Look it up. And it's about the group of Catholic activists that broke into the FBI headquarters and how they did it. It's like a Mission Impossible episode, and stole these records and then got them out. They finally came out 40 years later after all the statute of limitations had run in 2011, because it all happened in 1971. And what they revealed, if anybody goes back to study the Church Commission hearings and the COINTELPRO hearings, one example is that in one town, I'm forgetting where it was, there was a very effective local peace movement. And at the center of it was kind of a power couple, activist couple. They made sure things happen. How this agent bragged about basically having this group fizzle out into nothing by spreading rumors that they were cheating on each other, and caused the couple to break up. Once the couple broke up, the group fell apart, and he was happy with himself in his report to the FBI. I mean, this is the type of thing that led to these reforms, where they're saying, you FBI are a law enforcement organization. It's not up to you to destroy the peace movement or even to destroy the Klan. Really, I mean, it's your job is to enforce the law and and prevent crime, and certainly not to encourage it because you think it might look good for your political cause, right? So translate that up to the future, all right? Maybe you've got a slightly more enlightened FBI that's not quite as reactionary as it was back then, but is kind of more insider Washington that doesn't like that Trump is invading this. Yeah, we need to take a look at that, because it could easily flip to something else. Once Trump takes over, he cleans out, for instance, it could flip back to a Hoover type situation if we don't have those safeguards. But they got to be willing to look at the Patriot Act, because that rolled back a bunch of the Church Commission recommended reforms that Congress passed.
And so thank you for that background, because it's really important for context. I think that the magnitude of the problems in the exercise of power are very different from what you described. And I think it's important to mention here too that this report, while most people are saying that it's really not much is going to come of it, the FBI did respond to the report. I'm gonna quote here from the FBI's statement. They said, the conduct in 2016 and 2017 that Special Counsel Durham examined was the reason that current FBI leadership already implemented dozens of corrective actions, which have now been in place for some time. Had those reforms been in place in 2016, the missteps identified in the report could have been prevented. This report reinforces the importance of ensuring the FBI continues to do its work with rigor, objectivity, and professionalism the American people deserve and rightly expect.
Yeah.
So that's it.
And I would be fine with Jim Jordan or whoever calling that person to Congress to be specific about that.
Yeah.
I think that's completely legitimate. I'm fine with that. But it's again, I started to read the report, and there's nothing really new. We knew about that couple. We knew about the altering of the email, which, by the way, is not uncommon in law enforcement. I've seen cops lie outright on the stand to get what they want. There's part of a culture in law enforcement in this country anyway, that, once you've decided somebody's guilty, your job is to make sure that person gets convicted no matter what. And that's your job, not, to tell the truth or respect the process. I'm sorry, but that is a reality in there. I mean, even on some of the cop shows that are supposed to be showing them in good light, they brag about this, right? Anyway, but we're a little bit off topic there, but kind of not, because we're talking about one of the major cop organizations federally.
Yeah, I'll just say, I know we're out of time here, but I'll just say it's somewhat damning, despite the message that says it's not, and there was no redemption for Trump, despite the Republicans' message that it was.
Certainly. No spying by Obama. That's the big disappointment.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
Okay, we are now we're back into a mini election season. We had several elections in several states yesterday. Philadelphia is not a state. Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and Florida. And there are actually some very interesting results and some things that we need to discuss in terms of national political significance. I think it was actually a good night for Democrats, and I think one of the best news why don't we start down in Florida? The Jacksonville mayor's race was Jacksonville is actually has more Republicans. I think they have a plurality. I don't think it's a majority Republican, but a plurality Republican city. Up until now, the mayor who just got term limited out is a Republican, and this was the largest city or largest urban area under Republican control. Well, and Florida has been bad news for Democrats for the past several years, particularly. DeSantis endorsed Daniel Davis, the Republican. There was a lot of money spent on it, and he loses to Donna Deegan, a Democrat, 52 to 48%, fairly close election. But this is a big deal because this is potential national. We still have Biden. His approval ratings are low, and DeSantis, is maybe not quite as popular as he was. But is this a blow to DeSantis to start with? And is this something that the Republicans should worry about, given that everything has gone their way in Florida for the past, I would say, 8 years?
So I think this, excuse me for 1 second. Excuse me. I think this is an example of how all politics are local a little bit more than a sign of weakness for DeSantis. Mm-hmm. The city of Jacksonville is consolidated with Duval County. And so that means that there's the suburban areas, which lean red, had a dilutive power in the city's governance for 30 years or so. I think 1993, it's been Republican straight through, except for with the exception of one 4-year term. So that it's a little bit of an outlier in terms of large urban areas. But this former journalist, Donna Deegan, she campaigned on transparency. She campaigned on clean governance. And I think that people were kind of tired. The electorate was kind of tired of the Republican machine in their community. And that was sort of more of the overarching willingness of some folks. Maybe the overreach of DeSantis is marginally impacting that community because it is, after all, a city.
But this is considered a major upset, right? I mean,
yeah. First female mayor too. So yeah, to have a Democratic journalist, female, elected in a like I said, Duval County is red, and you don't have to get too far west from the coast to get to areas where you see Confederate flags all over the place too. So it's a very right-leaning Northern Florida, Central Florida, and I say all over the place. I don't mean to make light of it, but they're there. I've been through there, so I know for sure that it's right-leaning out there.
And let me throw something in here to you, because this wasn't a low Republican turnout. GOP had a high turnout with 98,651 votes cast, but it was independent voters that tipped the scale for Deegan, that gave it to her. That's something that, granted, these politics are probably local, but that is definitely something that Republicans might have to look at.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
And especially, not to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but that's especially in light of, like, DeSantis is relentless. Like, I just saw a photo of him from, I think, this week with a whole in front of him a spread of like 6 or 7 or maybe even more bills that he's signing. So he's out there signing bill after bill after bill. That is, he's planting a flag firmly on the side of the culture war. And like you said, if the independents were the marginal difference there, then that could explain a lot of this, whether it is the anti-abortion rhetoric, the anti-equality rhetoric. It's not just rhetoric, it's actually putting into action. For example, you and I had talked before about the librarians. I mean, I know we don't want to dwell too much on Florida, but this is just wave after wave after wave of a rightward lurch. And this was a line in the sand that was a little too far for that more balanced community.
Now let's move up to Kentucky, because DeSantis did take a bit of a hit there in terms of they were dueling endorsements from Trump and DeSantis. And in the primary to run for governor against Democratic Governor Beshear, who is uncharacteristically popular Democratic incumbent in Kentucky, and may yet win this, but he was up against what's his first name? Trying to remember Cameron's first name, but he is African American. I've seen him. He's actually, it scares me as somebody who tends to lean Democratic, as a up and coming Republican who is really sharp. I've seen him speak. He spoke, I think, at the Republican convention, and he wins, defeated DeSantis's candidate, and the
Daniel Cameron, his name is
Daniel Cameron. That's it. And Trump is all over him, saying the Ron DeSantis magic is gone, trying to hype that up as a victory for him. I just think Daniel Cameron is a really good candidate, but maybe they didn't calculate that he would do so well in Kentucky as an African American, no matter how good he is. But he did win that Republican primary. We'll see how he does in November against, again, a very popular candidate. But this is being perceived as a blow to DeSantis. I don't know.
I would say that Kelly Craft was somebody that DeSantis backed, maybe in part just to have a confrontation with Trump, a symbolic confrontation, and also maybe to try to build allies where he saw an opening. But the truth is that Cameron was a staffer of Mitch McConnell, and articulate, accomplished, respectable in the establishment, the Kentucky establishment. So it was a difficult expectation that he would lose, given that the senator and the machine was behind Cameron.
Now, definitely speaking, now, Cameron, I may be making a little bit of a mistake here. He just said, let me just say the Trump culture of winning is alive and well in Kentucky. I don't know what the politics are like in Kentucky at the moment in terms of the Republicans and the independents, but this might be the point where you kind of don't necessarily you got the Trump you got the Trump endorsement. Do you really need to pander to him at this point? I don't know. Might be a mistake, but we'll see. But maybe we'll see if he does that. We'll see how smart he is. But anyway, it's going to make it for an interesting race. We will see that. We'll see what happens. Anything else to say about that particular race?
I mean, not to draw too fine a point on it, but Kelly Craft, former ambassador to the UN, comes from a wealthy donor family. So DeSantis could just have been, soliciting support further down the road.
All right, let's go up to Pennsylvania. While the Democrats did really well, it was mixed for the progressive wing of the Democrats. Progressives have been on a roll of late, particularly in urban elections and the like. But they had a setback last night when Cheryl Parker became the first woman to be elected mayor of Philadelphia. And defeating Helen Jim by it was a crowded field. I think Cameron had Parker had like 33% of the vote. I think Jim had like 23, and then there were a bunch of other candidates. But this is kind of a blow. AOC and Bernie Sanders had supported Helen Jim. Parker ran on a campaign of we need more police. Not just anti-defund the police, but we need more police, and maybe that's what Philadelphia wants. And the interesting thing is Philadelphia has elected, and twice now, probably one of the most left-wing district attorneys in the country. So it's an interesting mix of politics, which, again, sometimes as you pointed out down in Florida, sometimes there's local aspects of politics that we don't necessarily take into account. And Parker did not win a majority, only won a third of the votes. So who knows if there were only going to be two candidates there instead of a whole crowd. But and we saw what happened in Chicago that way. So we have this, but it wasn't a total loss. In Western Pennsylvania, it looks like they're going to nominate Representative Sarah Innamorato as the next Allegheny County executive, and that is actually a progressive backed person. So they got to win there, but in Philadelphia, a significant loss to have such national progressive backing.
Yeah, I think, like you said, was this trend. Michelle Wu in Boston, Karen Bass in LA, then Brandon Johnson in Chicago. So progressives kind of figured that they may keep that rolling. But unfortunately, like you said, I think we can't underestimate the importance of the fact that the progressive vote was split. I guess Rebecca Reinhardt and Jim, Helen Jim. Like you said, they combine their vote tallies, it would have been a different outcome. So that's infighting to the detriment of that movement there. But yeah, it's one of those things where the black leadership of the city, it's called the quote in I guess it was the New York Times, was the black establishment, but also unions, so influential unions within the city, right. all supported Cheryl Parker. So that's one of those things where, the combination of splitting your own vote and also, major constituencies were not on board from the jump. So that explains it, I think, pretty clearly.
Now, one thing that happened in all three states, apparently, is election deniers had a real bad night. They lost almost all of their runs for Secretary of State in the primaries. And Pennsylvania Republicans might be getting tired of Trump's culture of winning. They chose a sort of a party establishment back praise to run for the state Supreme Court. They have Montgomery Court Judge Carolyn Carluccio defeated Commonwealth Court Judge Patricia McCullough, who briefly halted the certification of the state's election results in 2020 and had the backing of Mastriano, who was, again, the Trump candidate for governor last time around, who possibly cost them not only the governor's race, but may have been helped out with the Democrats in the Senate race as well. It may be that Pennsylvania's Republicans are starting to wake up and may not want to follow Trump down that path.
And so you mentioned that in Pennsylvania, something similar in Kentucky, where an election denying challenger was defeated, the Secretary of State, where that was just one of those things where people just didn't want to perpetuate that Trump messaging. They're ready to move on. It appeared to me from that was a significant element, like you described, in both Pennsylvania and Kentucky.
So any overall takeaways for these elections? These aren't as important as some of the other elections. Some of them are primary elections, but any takeaways?
Well, I think that when we talk about these are, this is sort of an off-cycle kind of election, so that's why we talked about it at the granular level, how local conditions maybe had a little bit more influence than ordinary, but I think that there was a balance of power that was maintained in Pennsylvania, right, in the legislature, by one vote advantage for the Democrats. So that just shows, like, in an relatively evenly split state, that it's you could see that there was there's no strong anti-Biden. So that's sort of one of the things that we could be talking about. There's not a lot of motivated challenges, I guess, even though it's still a primary time. Like we're not seeing a groundswell. There's nothing obviously inspiring and motivating Republicans, and in fact their sort of infighting that's happening right now between Trump and DeSantis, I think that this is there's battle lines being drawn to a certain extent. And when you look at the polling, Trump is getting, maybe not a full majority. It depends on the poll that you're looking at, but DeSantis is not gaining either. There's no obvious changing of the guards, but we are seeing cracks in the armor. So we'll see if more successful candidates come out. But as of right now, I mean, I think 2024 is like right around the corner in terms of when some of that money actually starts getting out there, and we start to hear, the challenges pick up in earnest.
Well, we will be watching that. We'll see where this race goes. DeSantis is, of course, so expected to declare in the near future.
Eeny, meeny, chili, beany, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to our predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
I'm going to keep it short and sweet this week, and we already alluded to it when we talked about the budget ceiling negotiation. I predict that cooler minds will prevail despite the grandstanding, and President has shown that he's got a pragmatic team around him. They'll do what it takes. There'll be some horse trading. Without use of any real gimmicks, they will be able to, realize that they need to compromise to forestall any kind of major crisis, and that in the short term they will make some concessions. We will see a formal lifting, temporary, of the budget ceiling, but then there will be ultimately a 14th Amendment long-term solution to hopefully do away with this dance that is really does no one. It's a disservice to the country.
I am going to go along with that prediction, but I'm actually going to say that we may not have an agreement before June 1st. And Biden may actually have to issue some bonds just to keep it above so that to give Yellen because I believe it was strategic that Yellen set the deadline for June. Who knows if that's real or not, but I think Yellen did it. That will make Biden able to trigger and do a quote unquote 14th Amendment solution to show that he's willing to do it. And then that will lead to a very quick resolution between them. And I do think that McCarthy is going to be forced to abandon the Hastert rule, because I think there are people in the Freedom Caucus that are just nihilists that just don't care.
Yeah, I think both of our predictions are mutually supportive. So by hook or crook, it'll work itself out. There's no way that they default.
Well, we'll find out, and we'll be back next week. Until then, stay informed and stay engaged.